They burned her heart and fed the ashes to her brother.
Was part of the inspiration for Bram Stoker's 1897 novel, Dracula.
Inside, Mercy Brown, the last American vampire. Welcome to Haunted Road Media. I'm author and ghost historian Mike Ricksecker. Explore the connected universe with us. Mercy Lena Brown was only 19 years old when she died of consumption, what we now call tuberculosis. But her tragic legend grew in death when she was suspected of vampirism. What happens when a desperate local community resorts to vampire lore to expel the demons of disease? Carl and Keith Johnson, paranormal investigators and demonologists, tell us the gruesome tale of Mercy Brown on location at her gravesite. I'm here at the grave of Mercy Brown, who in 1892 was suspected of vampirism after she had died of tuberculosis. It's a very, very tragic tale, and Carl and Keith Johnson are going to relate that story with us here today.
Hello there. We are here at the gravesite of Mercy Lena Brown. This is Chestnut Hill Baptist Cemetery in Exeter, Rhode Island. And this is what is known to Rhode Islanders and other aficionados of vampire lore as Vampire's Grave. Mercy Lena Brown succumbed to tuberculosis when she was 19 years of age. Her story is rather remarkable because she did not rest in peace. Her body was exhumed 2 months after her death on suspicion of vampirism, and here she remains. She died in 1892. Her case, her situation actually was part of the inspiration for, or used in research for Bram Stoker's 1897 novel, Dracula. And we'll be visiting a holding crypt, a keep, where her body was stored for the 2 months. She died in January and was exhumed in March. Members of her family, although she wasn't the first to expire, members of her family were dying in rapid succession from this wasting sickness known as consumption of the vampire germ. Today we know it as tuberculosis. It was thought that she was probably a supernatural agent was claiming these lives. There are reasons for that. George Brown, the father, was desperate to find a remedy, and they sought folklore, the supernatural. It was determined that her body should be excised under suspicion of vampirism. Indeed, her body was discovered in a remarkable condition. When the casket was opened, they say her eyes were wide open, eyelids open, and her lips were ruddy and parted into something of a garish smile. Her hands were fixed as claws, so this is the story. And they say even when she was moved, a moan was emitted from her throat.
Now there is another vampire legend about not quite 2 miles down the road this way on Forest Hills Drive, and that is Sarah Tillinghast. Now over the years, the story of Mercy Brown has become somewhat intertwined with the story of Sarah Tillinghast, so you get different elements of the Sarah Tillinghast story, such as the moan and the groaning when her body was disinterred.
Yeah, combined with the lore of Mercy Lena Brown.
I like to try to recreate Mercy Brown, what she was like as a person. Now, unfortunately, there are no likenesses of her that we know of from life. As Carl was saying, she did die at age 19. That was on January 17th, 1892.
Now, because of the way her body was treated, one would think this happened in the 17th century or earlier. It sounds more medieval.
It was actually very late for this to actually have taken place. It's the latter part of the 19th century, and most of this superstition had been done away with. But this place was Exeter was very, very rural, and it was becoming increasingly depressed at the time. Her mother died in 1883, December 1883, Mary Eliza Brown, and she was 36 years old. And only about 6 months later, the next eldest daughter, Mary Olive, she passed away from the same sickness. She was age 20. Here we are at the holding crypt where Mercy's her body was placed here during the winter time. Of course, she died in January 1892.
Why would they keep it here? Could they not dig a hole in the ground at that time?
Well, they didn't have backhoes at the time, so they really could not get into the ground. It was frozen solid, so what they did was place the bodies here in this holding crypt, which was actually very ornate and lovely at the time. And there was a little marker on the top of it, very nice. But as you can see, vandalism is rampant. It has been rampant in the cemetery for some time. Yep. Door has been wrenched off its hinges. And as you can see, it's cinder blocked up here, so there is no access to it. Actually, inside, I have been inside it years ago. There are no coffins in there, of course. It was just a temporary holding crypt, and also known as a keep. And it's actually yellow brick inside. She was in there 2 months exactly, because she died January 17th, very few days afterwards. And then on March 17th, 1892, were the exhumations. George Brown, again, didn't believe in the old superstition, but basically his friends at the Exeter Grange talked him into it. And being a desperate parent, he finally decided to go with the old superstition. Of course, her body was here and then taken out, probably freshly defrosted, which is why when Dr. Harold Metcalf did a rudimentary autopsy here, that's why her heart seemed to be filled with blood, which was probably recently defrosted.
Yeah, what were elements almost of the supernatural that would suggest the supernatural or preternatural? You had her heart filled with blood, which flowed.
Yeah.
You know, once it thawed. Her body had a lifelike appearance.
Now, Mercy, her middle name was Lena, and that's how her friends knew her. They did not know her as Mercy, they called her Lena. So that shows some independence, that she chose to go by her middle name. Her older sister, Mary, of course, went by the name of Olive, went by her middle name,
but I
too.
believe Mercy was the only exhumation in that the Brown family. Is that correct?
Well, first, they actually exhumed her mother.
Oh, yes.
Her mother, Mary Eliza.
That's right. They disinterred them all like around the same time, and they had gone to skeleton, I believe, as I recall.
Right, essentially. Her mother was, of course, died in December 1883, and her body was in kind of a mummified state. Now, of course, there's a lot of explanations for the decomposition or lack thereof. Depends how tight the coffin is, if water seeps in, but she was in a mummified state. Her heart was excised and it was just a lump of dried flesh. Next was Mary Olive to be exhumed. She was basically just skeletal, except she had a very long growth of thick hair remaining.
That, yes.
And then, of course, Mercy at the keep here.
Well, Keith, all of this seems to make sense. You have, you know, the bodies in advanced decomposition, you know, that are exhumed.
Yes.
And you have Mercy Lena Brown, and she is, as would be expected. Why did they think, why the idea that she was a vampire? Why did that seem to confirm that something supernatural was at work?
Well, it's interesting. The Exeter Grange, going back to that, the Grand Master of the Exeter Grange was William Rose. Now, some years before, William Rose had the same kind of situation in his family, where a daughter was disinterred after her death, to see if she was in fact uncorrupted and therefore probably inhabiting a vampire or a demonic spirit. Now he is the one that probably, we suspect, gave George Brown this advice. If you really want to do things the right way, you've got to see which one of them is actually a vampire spirit. The townspeople that had done the exhumations, they were convinced that's all they needed to, and so her heart was actually burned right in the cemetery, reduced to ashes. Now, by tradition, it is the stone right over there next to Mercy's grave and her sister's grave. Possibly it could have been over here where they burned it, because this is where her body was taken out and the heart was removed. And of course, the ashes were saved and mixed in a concoction, and they were fed to her brother Edwin, who was ailing at the time.
They made an elixir out of it and was given to him as an attempted inoculation.
Yeah, kind of like a rudimentary inoculation. Obviously, it didn't work. He
Very
died,
rudimentary.
Right. He died less than 2 months later on May 2nd, 1892. But in a way, the theory was correct. They had the theory correct.
Yeah, that they were proceeding on, you know, sound medical principle, which would become sound.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to me that the people assembled here very much bought into the supernatural explanation. If they went so far as to take out this woman's heart and liver, this young lady's heart and liver, and burn her organs on a stone, they must have believed there was
they
a vampire germ.
They either believed it, well, let's say it was suspension of disbelief, maybe for some of them.
So, like, don't take a chance just in case she is a vampire.
Right, exactly.
That's just bizarre. For 1892, the year of the Lizzie Borden murders, you know.
Yes, exactly. Lizzie Borden in Fall River. From there, it leaked out to the Providence Journal, And so it made the people here look like superstitious fools. So that basically put a stop to the vampire exhumations in Rhode Island and in New England.
Which had been going on for a century, right?
Right.
Throughout New England and New Hampshire. Yeah,
Right.
throughout Rhode Island and New Hampshire and Vermont.
That's why Mercy Lena is known as America's last vampire. And Rhode Island became known as the vampire capital of the country.
I see nothing, really, maybe borderline preternatural, but nothing supernatural involved in these situations.
No, the
I
supernatural
see
came
hysteria,
later,
I
yeah.
see superstition, I see fear,
Mhm.
I see desperation, Chief.
Oh yes, right. But there were supposedly supernatural events that occurred later. A relative in the early 1900s actually saw a great big orb. They're having some clam bake or some celebration going on at the church there, and he was in his car and he saw this great big blue orb. He was with a relative too, just hovering over her grave, and I tend to believe that is true.
Could there be another vampire outbreak, say in Rhode Island? Is there potential for that? Because people do become hysterical and become very fearful.
Well, as far as
easily.
the exhumations go, I don't think so. I don't think that would happen again. However,
Well, with modern burial
Yeah.
techniques, unlikely.
you get the urban legend that people believe. You know, my cousin's friend said he saw this, and then you get it kind of snowballs. And I think there could be kind of a fear of that if enough people believe it.
Mercy Brown's tragic vampire story now lives in infamy, but perhaps we can also remember her for the loving daughter, sister, and neighbor she was in life. And for other strange tales of the supernatural, please check out our other videos off to the side. I'm Mike Ricksecker. Until next time.